Welcome, everybody, to the Week 13 Best and Worst Picks and the year-to-date leader review through Week 12. I'm Jay Mill from CFF List. I got my partner, Willie B, as usual. How you doing, Willie?
Doing
All
good,
right, well,
doing
we've
good.
now got the rainy day that you had on Sunday. It's now made its way here on Tuesday in New Jersey. So, all right, well, this is the final week of us making our best worst picks since it is the final week of the college fantasy football season and the end of the regular college season. So we're glad to have been here for you guys that have listened. We appreciate everybody that's tuned in and week out. And if it's your first time, just because you wanted to see what we're up to over here, this is the weekly show where we go through the year to date leader list for all of the positions. We talk about who's worked their way up, who's been pushed in or out of the top 12 or top 16 lists. And in addition, we make our picks from among the year to date leaders at each position of who we think will be the best performer or worst performer at each position for this week. And we do keep a scoring of our predictions. If we're able to pick the best performer from the group, we get 3 points. If we get the second best performer from the group, we get two. Third best gets one. And the same thing for the worst. If we can pick the worst, we get 3 points, etc. For the year to date, Willie B is the leader with 92 points total and 87 points for me, Jay Mill, and that's coming off of a 6-3 win last week to expand his lead now to 5 points, which is not insurmountable. I do have a slim chance of catching him, but the way I've been performing in the scoring has not been so good. But sound a little bit like a broken record. Doesn't necessarily mean we've made the wrong picks. We just haven't made picks that have gotten us into the scoring category here. But we'll see how we do. Similar to last week, as we go through each position, we are going to take a little bit of extra time since we're really just helping people out that are in the championship games this week to give our recommendations on who we would start and sit among each of the year to date leaders. So we'll do just kind of a quick run through when we get to the current top 12 and top 16 lists of every player there, and if we feel like they're a good play or if they should not play this week. But we'll start it right off here with the quarterbacks and their performances from last week. Uh, Overall, it was probably just a mediocre performance by the QBs. You only had 5 out of the 12 that finished with 25 or more points. So even though the two scores at the very top, especially Daniels with his 62.1, were pretty outstanding, along with Bo Nix with his 40.9, you only had three others that had more than 25 points. And 7 out of the 12 had 21 or more, which was is adequate and good. But we've mentioned by this time of the year, when you're getting into the year-to-date leaders, you probably are looking for a quarterback that would get you at least 25 among this group, and only five were able to do that this week. And uh, 2 out of the 12 actually had less than 16, and that included Dylan Gabriel, who did not play in the second half of his game and only finished with 15-6, but he was off to a great start. Um, any thoughts on the quarterbacks and their overall performance, Willie?
Yeah, let's just not overlook Caden Salter. I mean, that
Mm.
40.8 is I'd say that he's a two A and two B with
Yeah,
Bo Nix. So, um, yeah, that one stood out as far as him just being a excellent waiver wire pickup for whoever got him earliest.
yeah, that's a good catch. I
Um,
think I overlooked that in my notes, and I had two over 40, and it was actually three over 40 if you include Caden Salter. So, yeah, that's a good
mhm.
catch.
Right? And then, you've been hyping up Byron Brown all season. His 25.8, that's
Pretty
where you
steady,
want to
yeah.
be. And yeah, and then, well, we'll say this now. We'll wave goodbye to Caleb Williams as his season is done as far as
Hmm.
fantasy wise, since they
Right,
have a bye this
right.
week. So uh, say goodbye to Caleb, and unless the top three just absolutely you know get a 10, something like that. He's where he's going to be when we go back and
currently.
look at the next list. But I still want to say
Right,
he's fourth. Yeah, but he's going to stay where
right.
he's at. So we'll just won't have to talk about that
Yeah, and there wasn't
too
a lot
much.
of movement in terms of the quarterbacks that are in versus those that are out. There was only one that actually ended up departing the top 12 list, which is the guy Willie B picked to be the worst. He ended up having the worst performance of all 12, which was Thomas Castellanos from Boston College. Uh, one note there uh, is well, not one note, but the note there is like after starting his first seven with 23 points or more, people have really caught on, I guess, to and the scouting has caught up with Castellanos, it appears, because three of his last four games, he's only had between 13 and 14 and a half points. And all three of those
Right.
games, it was because of a more limited rushing performance. So, it seems that teams, as the season rolled on, realized, okay, when this guy's in the game, he's going to run a lot, he's going to run well. How do we stop him? They seem to make that a focal point of the defense now against Boston College. So it'll be interesting next year to see if he can, pick up where he started this season, like in the 20s, or if teams know that to stop Boston College, you've just got to stop him running the ball because uh, after a nice little winning streak, they've lost a couple also there at Boston College.
Yeah, you're 100% correct on that because those three games that you mentioned, as far as those the 13, the 14 points, in those three games he was held under 50 yards
Exactly.
rushing. So you're
Yep.
absolutely right
Yep.
on
So
that. And so this screen here is where I got my 6 points, so having the best
right,
and the
yeah. Willie
worst
picked Jaden Daniels. He
pick.
told you,
So
he's number one for a reason. Stick with Jaden Daniels. Um, and then I actually scored a couple of my only points here. Also, I had Bo Nix as the second, as the best, and he finished second best. So we really did a good collective job overall here, guiding you with the quarterbacks. And maybe we can move up now and continue to try.
yeah, and
What's
then
that?
tails
Yeah,
off.
try to guide you through your.
So then it
Yep,
kind of
yep.
tails off. Yeah, but
All right,
anyway.
so good. So now, as we mentioned, just doing a little different for the playoffs, trying to help out those in their playoff games and now in their championship games. Assuming if you made it to the championship, you've got to have at least one, but probably a couple of these guys in the top 12 since you're in the championship. So maybe we'll, have some opinions on if you should start or sit, or which guys you should start or sit. So we're just going to run through them after noting that the one new name you see here is Mr. Cameron Ward, who's probably been the guy that's popped in and out the most. But he ended up uh, playing Colorado, which pushed him back into the top 12 again here. So we'll get to him in just a minute and find
Hmm.
out if Willie and I think that he'll stay around and finish in the top 12 because this is the last week for guys to move in and out. So for the most part, you're looking at the bulk of the guys that are going to finish as top 12 quarterbacks for the season. But let's kick it off with number 12 here, Willie, with Michael Penix. He's going against Washington State. We've actually got the two guys at the bottom facing each other. Cam Ward and Michael Penix play each other. Are you sitting or starting Michael Penix against Washington State? The number Fantrax has for him is 28th against passing quarterbacks or against quarterbacks. I mean, uh, so what do you think with Penix? The numbers,
Um, I think we
the
said we
number,
were gonna. Yeah, I want to say we
yeah,
said
the
we're
numbers are a
gonna go
little
ahead.
deceiving there. Uh, because even though Washington State's 28th in points allowed for fantasy quarterbacks, they're still 102nd in passing defense. Um, but yeah, what were you going to say?
No, I was saying I think we decided we were going to pick three to
Right.
sit from the
Yeah,
12
that's
group.
good. Yeah, I'm
So
glad you clarified there. I didn't know if we were going
um,
to run through each one or you just
mhm.
wanted to name off your three.
Yeah, so however we want to do it, but so I was trying to get in my head, okay, which three
Hmm.
is it going to be? And I have two pretty clear ones. So I'll say that I'm gonna start
Okay.
Penix.
Yeah,
We'll start him.
I think I start Penix also. Again, we haven't figured out the science behind the Fantrax ranking versus positions, but the fact that they're
Hmm.
102nd against the pass. I mean, I'm looking here. They're 102nd in yards given up. They don't give up a ton of touchdowns now that I look at it. So that's probably where the Fantrax number comes into play. They've only given up 12 passing touchdowns, which is pretty unbelievable with all the yards they give up as far as the 241 yards. But yeah, I think Penix is the kind of guy that you probably never want to sit, and I wouldn't take a chance of sitting him this week. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm going to do there. Uh, and again, just to clarify, we've selected the number. We wanted to just to make sure we just can't won't say to start everybody. We've said we've got to sit at least three guys from the list. So Willie, we're going to run through it quickly, but the one thing we're going to point out to people are that mainly emphasize the guys that we would sit from this list. We know they're all good quarterbacks, so the emphasis here is really to kind of guide you in terms of who you might consider sitting, keeping in mind the three we would choose to sit would be the three we think will have the worst performances this week, in addition to naming the one we think will have the absolute worst performance from this group. So with Michael Penix, would you start or sit him? And then, along with that, who are the three you think you might sit this week?
All right. Yeah. Now I'm going to go ahead and start Penix, and I play that only because I think Washington is going to win the game. I still think it's going to be, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
scoring. So I like them. The guys that I'm leaning toward sitting, obviously, I think it's going to be Haynes King with his matchup
Mm-hmm.
against Georgia. And then with Dylan Gabriel, we don't know what's going to go on with that with his
Mm-hmm.
head. I'm assuming it's going to be concussion protocol, but I'm going to definitely stay away from those two guys for
Okay.
sure.
And then I promise I'm not just copying to make it easy for myself. But yeah, I
Okay.
think I'd have to agree with you on that. So uh, now the tricky part is finding the third one out of these guys because none of the matchups are too scary.
Hmm.
Um, who's the
Hmm.
third guy that you sit here?
The third one that I guess I'm just gonna have to lean toward only because I just like what Salter
Mhm.
does, so I can't I just can't force myself to sit him. So I'm gonna
That's
sit
fine.
Drake
That's
May.
exactly who I was looking at. So we completely agree on the three, which that's probably good. I guess if you've got both of us feeling the same way about all three, that's a pretty good indication that if you're choosing from among this group, you may not want to play these guys as far as Gabriel, King, and Drake May this week. I almost said Bo Nix, but yeah, I think he's in that category where you better play him no matter what, even if he's playing Oregon State. Yep.
Right,
I mean, they contained
right,
Michael Penix, but they didn't shut him down. So
exactly.
all right. So now, I guess, out of those three, or we can get into the best worst. Who do you think will have the best or worst week in general?
I guess so. Are we
Yeah, yeah.
making
We'll
picks
just
here?
go into. Yeah, I guess
Okay.
obviously we know which three we'd sit, so we're going to probably both be
Hmm.
choosing from those three as far as our worst. But out of pick your best overall or the worst from those three.
Yeah, my best overall. I'll go ahead and take that one. Because I guess for me to win the competition, I might as well just copy what you're doing, and I'm guaranteed my win. But um, I'm gonna go. Like I say, we've been talking about
Hmm.
this guy, and not sure how the box got placed in
Oh,
here. I
that's
hate
all
when
right.
it does that.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm going to take Caden
Okay.
Salter as my best for the week. I know they get UTEP, but I'm just going to give him a nod on what he's just accomplished all
Okay.
season long. So we'll go Salter. I don't see him getting under where Penix is right now with his
Hmm.
25.9. So feel comfortable even if he does have a slightly down game.
Okay. Uh, yeah, I was thinking Salter also, but I do need to kind of get away from you to kind of catch some points here. I've been pretty impressed with Milrow. I thought in the one half that he played, even though it was Chattanooga, he looked real sharp. His last few games have been pretty strong. Uh, it's Auburn, who's not very good this year. So let's go Jalen Milroe. They're going to be out to kind of run up the score probably in hopes that whatever happens in their game, stands out and the right teams lose and they might still be able to make the playoffs down the line. So, Alabama's going to be on a mission to do whatever they can to still try to get in the playoffs. So I'm going to go Milrow. Um, and then out of the three
Okay.
worst, who do you got? We know we said we'd sit King and Gabriel and May. So which of those three would are you are you least confident in?
Oh, it's definitely King. Their Georgia's defense is really the one true that stands
Yeah,
out all the lists
yeah,
here. So definitely King for me.
yeah. And as much as I've loved him and was one of the first to jump on the King train. Uh, I think I've got to agree with you. It's just too tough of a matchup for him. I'm looking. He still, for the whole season, only had one game under 20 points, which is pretty impressive considering nobody even had him in the top, 30, likely in the top 30 that I recall. Maybe not even in the top 50 quarterbacks in the preseason. His 18, Clemson held him to 18, so you got to assume Georgia's going to do the same thing. But that was the only game that he was held under 20 fantasy points. But if you got Haynes King, it's just a bad matchup week for you in your championship. So hopefully you've got somebody else you can roll with. You can check out our waiver wire. We had a couple of good guys there that you might replace him with even because I think those would be even better options than Haynes King this week. So,
Right. Agree. So I
yep,
guess we
let's
can
move
move
it on
on.
up. We'll get into the tight ends who, are really trying to make us forget all the bad stuff we said about them early on in the season. These last couple of weeks, the tight ends have really been coming along as far as this top 12 group and the group that's been here. We've got 8 out of the 12 that scored 11 plus points this week. So that's 8 in double digits, which is pretty unusual the way this season's gone. And you even had 4 out of the 12 with 19 plus points. So you had nearly four that were nearly in the 20 points category. Um, and that includes the guy I picked to be the best, which was David Martin Robinson. Ever since Warner's been back, he's been on a roll. He's had a couple of games here in the last 3 or 4 over 20 points. So I got my final point for him getting the third best. Willie B, here's an example of us getting close and not steering you wrong, but not scoring. He had Bowers as his best, who only had 19 points this week, which is crazy to say that one of the top tight ends did not get in the top three with 19 points. That's how good the group did. Uh, Harold Fannin has been incredible. His third game over 20 in a row, I believe. And then Holden Willis, the guy that we knew almost nothing about when the season started, had his one of his biggest games of the year with the best performance at 28 and a half. And then we both picked Dykes to have the worst game. Again, we didn't score points there, but he only had 7.6, I should say. Uh, which there were only a couple of guys that had under looks like 10 points, and he was one of them. Yeah, there was
10.
four
Yeah.
guys that had under 10. Um, Interestingly, the Willie warning held true. Your number two tight end for the season, Dallin Holker, had his second worst performance of the season in these last two games. He's had 6 point something and 4.9. So Willie B, good job on the Holker call. You were calling that midseason, saying we'll find out if he's the real deal near the end of the season, and your prediction was absolutely right on Holker falling apart.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, he had those tough defenses coming up, and I thought it would just be a bad
Yep.
month for him, and it turns out it was. He had that good decent game against San Diego State, but other
Hmm.
than that, the last 3 out of the 4 weeks, yeah, he's been
Yeah.
under 10.
And maybe the biggest surprise, and you could attribute it to the rain, maybe, but Velling only had 1.1 after we've hyped him up so much in the last 3 weeks after some really big performances. We thought he'd actually push his way up and contend for that tight end one spot the way that he was rolling, but I think that blew all of his chances to finish at tight end one. Um, and we'll see where he landed here in just a second. Maybe Willie, it's a good time to roll it up. The names you won't see as we move it up are Dabney, uh, and Brenningstool and Dykus. We talked about Dykus only having 7.6. Interestingly, Dabney and Brenningstool both had 11.7 and 11 points, but that wasn't enough this week to keep them in the top 12. Amazingly, so that's really a first. Is two tight ends that scored in the double digits. It wasn't enough to hold on to a top 12 spot. They only fell to the 13th and 14th spots, but they're replaced with guys that had much bigger weeks. You have Wiley back in the mix here from TCU, jumping all the way from 22 up to number 6. Dalvin Smith, who's been in and out for Western Kentucky, uh, jumps in from 18 to number 10. And then a guy that we've really been excited about, and if you tune into the waiver watch draft, Justin Jolly from UConn, uh, deservedly so, has made his way for the first time all year into the top 12 at that number 12 spot, in large part to his 10 and 11 targets that he's had in the last 3 weeks, which have had him over double digits in each of those 3 weeks as well. And he's also one of our waiver watch picks this week. So uh, I know, he's probably not a guy either one of us are going to sit playing against UMass. Uh, but here you go. Dallin Holker, somehow manages to hold on to that number 2 spot, I guess because he was so far ahead of everybody underneath him. But it looks like there's nobody that's going to even be able to come close to catching Bowers. He's got that number 1 spot locked down. Um, and anybody else on the list stand out, Willie, before we get into who we might sit out of this group?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but speaking of Dalvin Smith, coming to the season, he was supposed to be, this hybrid type, and everybody was saying that kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
Rondé Gadsden type, but it's actually Holden Willis who's actually, in the Dalvin Smith,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, uniform. But as far as what everyone
Right,
was predicting
right.
preseason, so that's kind of where, everyone thought he should be is where Holden
Yeah, and I
Willis
was looking at
sits,
that.
at the three
I'm
spot.
glad you mentioned Dalvin Smith again because even though he managed his way back onto the list with his third game over 15 points, he ended up with 25.5 this week. He's had 5 games this season with 6.3 points or less. So he's been really hot
Yeah.
and cold, and not nearly as consistent as a lot of the other guys. At the very top, or especially a guy like Holden Willis, who has been very consistent all year. But yeah, Dalvin Smith, as good as he was this week, and he's been at times. You got to be a little frustrated if you had him uh, this season. Having the 5 games with less than 6 points when people expect a lot more from him.
Mm,
But
right. Absolutely.
okay, so I guess
I mean, especially as high as he was probably drafted.
exactly.
So,
But I guess he still ended up with an 11-point average, so we'll see how he finishes against FIU, um, which it makes it interesting here on who to sit. We've got a group of 12 here, the top 12, so we've got to find 3 each that we would sit. So I'll go first here since you did it last time. I'm not benching any of the guys in the top 4. I'm not worried about anybody they're playing. Cade Stover, it sounds a little scary that he's playing Michigan, who's 19th against tight ends. I'm going to have to earmark that. And I think because of the matchups that a lot of the other people have, I probably would consider benching Stover. He'd be one of my 3. Uh, Wiley's another guy that's been inconsistent, so I'm going to go ahead and bench Wiley out of this group again compared to the others here. And then I'm going to, I probably, it's either Velling or Nesbitt that I'm choosing from. I think Velling bounces back, and I'm going to bench Nesbitt. So I'm going to bench Nesbitt, Stover, and Wiley out of my tight ends here. I'm curious now to see, Willie, how your sits, who you would sit compares to mine, if it's going to be any different.
Um, Obviously, I agree with you on Stover and Nesbitt. Only Stover, only because Michigan's giving up the least as far as
Yep.
touchdowns are concerned. And then it's just hard to. I just don't know what Oklahoma is
Hmm.
doing. Um, so really can't go that route
With Wiley.
necessarily with Wiley. So I'm gonna say let's sit Velling,
Yeah.
only because of what
Yeah.
happened last week, and then they're going against an Oregon defense. So let's
Yeah.
I'm gonna
That
say
was
Velling.
the one.
So we'll go Stover,
That was the
Nesbitt, and Velling.
fourth one. So yeah, you went Stover, Nesbitt, Velling. I went Stover, Wiley, and Nesbitt, and I was choosing between Nesbitt and Velling. So, um, those are the four that we're kind of suggesting you think twice before playing them. If you've got any of the others on this list, again, as we mentioned last week, if you've got the tight end 50 on your roster, you probably still play Jack Velling. If that's who you're choosing between, you probably still
Hmm.
play Wiley.
Hmm.
If you've got tight end 38. uh, but if you're choosing between Fannin and Wiley, we're saying play Fannin, bench Wiley. If you got Willis,
Yeah.
we're saying bench Stover, play Willis. So you guys see how it goes. And you do think Holker will finish his final game strong against Hawaii? You didn't choose to sit to bench him. What do you think? That's an interesting one. Holker versus Hawaii.
Yeah, no, Hawaii they give up a lot of
Hmm.
touchdowns. So, if we're gonna say worst, I just see, those other three guys that I chose, having a little worse game than
Okay.
Holker will.
So we've named the three that we each think will be the worst. I'll start off with the guy that I think will have the best week, and that is going to be Mr. Holden Willis. I think he's going to finish the way he's been performing all season against Sam Houston, who looks to be very bad against tight ends. So if you've got Holden Willis, it's your lucky week. You will have the best tight end in the championship,
According
according to
to
Jay
J Mill
Mill.
numbers,
Yes.
I guess. Okay, I got you. Okay, so I'm gonna go with the guy that he's just been on the
Mhm.
come up. He gets a great matchup against UMass, and that's going to be Justin
Okay.
Jolly. UMass, they've given up 24 passing touchdowns. They don't give up a ton of yards, which to me means they're more focused on the wide receivers. So it should open up some things for Justin to do his
Yeah,
thing.
I agree with that. That's one of the guys. We've been mentioning. When I make the posts on Twitter, you know, Fannin and Jolly are as good as anybody that you could play this week. Even if you've got to go pick them up off waivers, and Jolly and Fannin would probably be my second and third choices right behind Willis as the guys that will have the best week. So amazingly, you can get Jolly and Fannin in a lot of leagues right now because they're still both under 30%, as we talked about in the waiver watch. So pretty crazy when that happens at the end of the year.
Well, Fannin actually just
Ah,
went to
interesting. As
30.
the week started, he got over 30 finally.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right. So I'll
Okay.
jump here and it's just hard to say that people are going to score on
Hmm.
Michigan and
Yeah.
especially through the air. So um, and they have 14 interceptions. That to me is a great number there.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say stay away from Kate Stover this
Okay.
week
Well,
if you can.
yeah, I've got to get some separation from you in the points, and I probably wouldn't have picked Stover to be the absolute worst, even though he's one of the three I would sit. Uh, I think because he's just been a little more. Wiley again he only made it into the top 12 because he had 36.8 last week. Um, he's had some double-digit games this year, but I'm looking now. He's had one, two, three, 4 games with less than 4 points. So I don't think the consistency's there to put a lot of faith in Jared Wiley. Not only is he one of the three I would bench, I think Jared Wiley ends up with the worst performance out of the top 12 tight ends this week.
Okay.
So there you have it.
Well, I just don't know. To me, when I was looking at him, don't know if Gabriel's playing, which means you don't know how much that Oklahoma offense is going to be on the
Mhm.
field, and if they're not on the field, it gives TCU a ton of opportunities to be on the field. So that's the reason why I was a
Right.
little hesitant on
I hear
Wiley.
you. Always good to get that
All right.
second opinion. All right, so we're going to move it up to the wide receivers. Uh, Overall, as a group last week, it's kind of how they have been. This top 16 group's been all year. We've pointed out that the average, for the top 16 or the guys points per game within the top 16 seems to be a little bit lower as far as the overall group. They're kind of in the low 20s versus the bulk of the group being in the mid to high 20s. And that's how it played out this week. You had 11 out of the 16, which is a really good number, finish with nearly 20 points at 19.6 or more. Uh, and 7 out of those 16 only 7 out of the 16 had 24 or more, which is kind of that elite number that 25 is kind of that elite number you would expect if you have a top 16 receiver, and not even half of the group, hit that mark. Um, and then you had a quarter of the group that had 12 points or less, which is, pretty disappointing if you had a guy like Marvin Harrison only get you 12 points this week, who Willie B and I both, predicted to have the best week. I'm sure nobody's happy with Marvin Harrison getting that 12, Willie.
No, absolutely not. Like I said, I mean, I just don't understand. And we talk about before with
Hmm.
Bowers, you know, proving that he is that first round pick. He's done that. Marvin, he does it some games, and then he'll have this happen. So I just don't understand how that happens. I mean, 12 is a decent number, but what I don't like is 3 for
Yeah,
30.
3 for 30. Somehow they only target him 6 times. Maybe it was because the score 37-3. I don't know how much he sat in the second half. Maybe it was that kind of a situation. But yeah, it's you hate to see that if you had him in the playoffs last week and were counting on him. I know that we didn't have him, but we had enough people disappointed as it was. So
Yeah, and it could have easily happened 2 weeks ago against Rutgers when he had 4 for 25. He just happened to get in the end
right,
zone
right,
twice.
exactly. So as far as the the other predictions, we didn't. This is probably where we did the worst. We picked Harrison to have the best week. He had 12. We both picked guys to have the worst week that actually did okay. I had picked Torrey Horton to get shut down, thinking that Colorado State would just be successful running the ball against Nevada and wouldn't have to throw it much. He ended up with 19.8. You had Luther Burden with 24.8 against Florida. And he's proven to be a pretty consistent guy this year. He's been on the top 12 nearly all year long. So yeah, this was our weak spot this week. So we got to bounce back and do a little better for the people in terms of our predictions on the receivers.
Yeah, I agree. And like I say, there's going to be some inconsistency with some guys, and like I said, that's what happens in playoff time. And you just gotta
Yeah, I think
you know take it on the chin and
keep it
move
moving.
move on a
Take it
little
on the
bit.
chin and keep
So
it moving. One thing I will
yeah,
say is, as far as I'm
yeah.
looking at the names that moved out, you had Terrell Vaughn from Utah State move out. He's kind of slowly been fading away. Hobart from Texas State is out. But the things you can't predict are a guy like Polk from Washington getting 0 points. I mean, we know he played in that game because I saw him have a couple drop passes in the rainstorm. But Um, other receivers caught passes, and Polk ends up with zero. Uh, that's something I don't think anybody can
Yeah.
predict.
Yeah, I mean, I hate, kind of being the overthinker, the micromanager, and then you look at
Hmm.
the weather. So I really didn't, want to factor in rain and all of that. But, you still targeted six times, and like you said, you had some drops. You
Yeah,
got to catch
exactly.
those. You know,
And,
if you're a top 16 receiver, you
right,
got to
right.
catch them.
So
So
the new names, as you see here, as we look at the current top 16, you've got Ricky White making his way from 17 up to 12. The fact that he was 17th and just barely hanging outside of the list shows that he was doing some things right even before this week. But I will note here uh, he only had one game over 11 in the first five. So this is the tale of two seasons kind of guy. He had one game with more than 11 points in his first five games of the season, but he's had 22 plus in five of his last six games, and four of those have been over 30 points. So Ricky White has really been the guy you want in the second half of the season, because I don't know if anybody else has had four 30-point games. I think Harrison might have had three, but Ricky White now probably a candidate for second half MVP at wide receiver with four games over 30 in the last six.
yeah, I mean, and it's a name that you haven't heard us say. It's only because he doesn't fit the criteria of A being in
Mm-hmm.
top 16 wide receiver, and only because of the slow start that you mentioned. And he's rostered in so many leagues. I mean, he's 69% rostered, so that's why we really don't hear us talking about
Right. Yeah,
Ricky
he's in that
White,
weird category of he was
only
just kind
because
of under the top six.
yeah,
Well, he was way under the top 16 to start, and then kind of just slowly worked his way up, and then you know he just got enough to get him in this week,
he's
and he's gonna. I would say he'll probably finish here.
mhm.
Playing against San Jose State. The other new names quickly are McMillan from Arizona. So we've got a new McMillan in the top 16 with 20.7. He's had over 18 points in eight of his 11, so he hasn't been, the huge game breaker, but he's been a guy who's consistently, gotten you 18 to 25 points, which is what you need. And then Leggett from South Carolina, whose passing game has really come along in the second half of the season also. But he's just been hot and cold. So he's benefiting from the last three games strictly, where he had 43, 21, and 26 points. But he had a string there in the middle where you didn't want to even go near him after starting off as a receiver that you thought you might want to consider. So he's kind of the Dalvin Smith of the wide receiver group, where one week you think he's great, then he has a couple of bad weeks, and then all of a sudden, he has one of the highest scoring weeks of the season. So yeah, he's been very inconsistent, but he's had a big enough 3 weeks in a row to land on the top 16. I just don't know playing against Clemson if he'll stay, which might be the lead-in to pick. Since now we've got a top 16, we're going to tell you four guys that we think you should sit each. And Leggett would be one that I'm sitting if I've got him. But Willie, do you have yours in mind already, or should we work through this together?
Uh, well, I have a
Okay,
few of
yeah. If you
mine
want to throw
already.
out a couple, and then I could throw out a couple of
Okay,
mine.
okay. Yeah, Leggett, obviously,
Yeah.
we talked
So we're
about, the inconsistency
yep.
and things like that. We talked about it with Marvin Harrison. I just don't trust offenses when they have to face
Hmm.
Michigan. So Harrison's going to be the other. It's usually one or the other guy when we talk about the LSU. So Brian Thomas is going to be
Hmm.
mine in that
Okay.
situation. And then, and so then lastly, we were talking about NC State. So I'm going to have to say, I'm going to steer of Tez Walker
Yeah.
this
So
week
I'm going
for
to
me.
co-sign Leggett and Devontae Walker. I like where you're thinking with Brian Thomas because as much trouble as they've had, and or not trouble, but as disappointing as they've been to their fans, A&M's defense is still 42nd against receivers. So Uh, I think Thomas is a pretty solid pick there as well. Um,
Even though he's due for he's the up and down guy, the yo-yo that we've
right.
been talking about. He's due for a big game. So because he's had 27, 6, 33, and then the 19. So he's due for a big game, but
Yeah,
I
again,
don't
because
see
we're
it
comparing
this
him to
week.
the other guys on this list, and if we would play him ahead of these guys. So who do we feel most confident in? Yeah, I'm gonna stick with Leggett and Walker, and then I will go the same as you with Brian Thomas. And for some reason, the Utah State guys just have. Uh, I think it's a little bit hit or miss with the Utah State receivers. So I think I'm gonna go with Jalen Royals as a guy that if I'm comparing him to others on this list, I would put on the bench. I'm going to go ahead and take my chances with Marvin Harrison. Uh, not to necessarily have a spectacular week, but I don't think he'll finish in the bottom four out of this group. It should be a fun game, but I think he's got something to prove there. So,
Okay.
all right, and then it's your turn to pick the best from the group. Who do you think will have the best performance? And then, or unless you want to just select the absolute worst from the four you're
Ooh.
benching.
Um, Man, so many good
Yep.
names here. Um, if we got to go, who's gonna stay hot? Um, and only because we haven't really had to talk
Mhm.
about him so much. I'll have to look at. I'm trying to see what San Jose State's defense has been doing. They give up a 177. Now I can't. As hot as Ricky White has
Mhm.
been, I can't go that route. So stay away from that one. Um, man. Let me go LeJounte Wester.
Okay, yeah, he was the target king for quite a while this season. He's sitting there at wide receiver two for a reason. Um, but that's another example here when you look at the averages. He's wide receiver two for the season, and he's sounds crazy to say, but he's only averaging 25 when usually you have at least five or six at the top that are at least somewhere between 27 and 30 points, and um, the group as a whole here is just a lot lower than top 16s from the past. But by the way, I'll note neither one of us picked Malik Washington against a tough Virginia Tech defense there to be one of the worst. I think we've both been impressed with all the targets and what he does with his targets there at Virginia. So I'm not going to go him best because he's playing a tough team, but I thought it was interesting. Neither one of us were scared of the Virginia Tech 14th rank against receivers. Um,
Well, kind of like what you did in the last position. It's hard to say that a guy in the top four is just gonna,
right.
you know, have
Yeah,
a
these are
really bad game.
they're
So,
in the top four because they have been very consistent all year long. Uh, for
right.
some reason, Malachi Corley jumps out at me against FIU. Um, so I'm going to go Corley. Western Kentucky hasn't been what we thought they'd be this year, but I know he had a big week last week. And Florida International is pretty bad all around. They've given up 21 touchdowns, 240 yards a game for rounding off there. Uh, so I'll go with Corley as the best.
Yeah, and I I'm gonna go back to
Mhm.
Wester here real quick. Not many fare well, and like I say, I always talk about Tulane. He had
Mhm.
19 against Tulane, so he's to me he's due. Um, that's the reason why I went
Yeah.
that route. But to kind of speed things along, I'm gonna stick with it.
Okay.
Harrison, you got to show me something. I picked you to have the best last
Yep.
week.
He's in your
Obviously,
doghouse.
that did not happen. Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Hey, well, that
in the
did me a favor
doghouse.
because then that's the one out of your four that I didn't pick as one of my four. So I know we can have something different here. So that allows me to stick with Leggett as the worst, and maybe catch up on some points with you here.
And then a quick note there, what I see here is there's going to be some guys jumping into to the portal from that
From
game.
which
So
game?
we'll see from the
Oh,
Clemson
yeah,
South
no
Carolina
doubt.
game.
Yeah, well, but in because of his philosophy as it stands, we know people will not be
Yeah.
going to Clemson because
Yes.
he doesn't like to use the portal over there at Clemson.
Yeah. Well, I was leaning toward the other way of seeing some
Leaving
guys
Clemson?
leaving, but
Oh no, yeah,
we'll
yeah. I'm
see.
just making fun
Uh-huh.
of the fact that Dabo's kind of gotten himself into this
Yeah.
situation of being criticized for kind of not, kind of
Right.
pretending like he
Right.
doesn't need to use it too.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
wants to remain a
Okay.
dinosaur. That's okay. Um, all right, we'll
Last
move
group.
into the running backs now. Um, we are looking at the performance from last week from our top 16. A pretty good performance. We had 9 out of 15 that had over 20 points or more. The reason it's 15 is Jonathan Brooks is out for the rest of the season after his bad injury 2 weeks ago. But he had enough games to qualify, so he will finish in the top 16 because he played all but these last couple of weeks. Uh, but nine out of, or maybe he didn't. We'll see. I think he did get bounced from the list on the new one. Um, 9 out of 15 were over 20 is the bottom line. You even had 4 out of the 16 that managed 23.8 or more. Um, but the guys, there were a group that did perform pretty bad to be top 16 guys. You had 4 out of 15 that were still under 14. So even though the bulk of the group did what they needed to do and got you over 20, you had guys that you're used to seeing perform really big, like Rasheen Ali, Ramon Davis, Marquise Irving. All have you know bad games. All things considered, if you've got those guys as on your roster and they're top 16 running backs, you're probably not too happy with anything under 15, and hopefully that didn't cost you anything. But we picked Marcus Carroll to be the worst. He was pretty impressive against LSU and still managed 23.8, proving that he can do it against anybody. I guess, right, Willie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't think that that would happen. Obviously, you get in the end zone, that's going to give you
Hmm.
that bump. Um, but he stayed steady with it. I mean, 5.8 yard average against a team like LSU. I
Yeah,
gotta
yeah, and he's
respect
been fun
that.
to
So,
watch.
yeah,
Yeah,
did
he's
not
been a
see
fun
that.
guy to watch.
Oh yeah,
Runs with a lot of power. Yeah, Willie missed the mark. I didn't stay up late for this one to see, why Kyrie Robinson ended up with only 10. Um, did you happen to see kind of how it was split between him and Conley, or was that a factor? Did he, just not get the chances he normally does?
no, I mean, Conley had a
Hmm.
great game. Um, he he seemed a little bit off for his standards. He had 11
Hmm.
for 40. He did have the touchdown, but basically this was kind of like Conley's
Hmm.
show. He had the bigger plays. Um, so I mean, it happens. I mean, it happened to us
Yeah, we had him
in
in the Kings
Kings,
Classic.
unfortunately. But
You,
yeah, and so it's kind of like hopefully I didn't put the
the Jinx.
slow down on it because when you're down by 100, what's just let's just shut it down. So hopefully I didn't put too much of that into the
Yeah,
universe, but you know
yeah.
it is what it is. But I did say last week, and Mr. Ollie Gordon
Hmm.
the second, actually, I guess he was in coach's office and said, "Hey,
Yeah,
give me
yeah.
the
You
ball."
mentioned that he was probably going to be going to have a talk with Coach Gundy, and whatever happened there worked out for him because he was back
Yeah,
on top of the top 16 with 41 points. Um, I had picked Schrader to be the best, and again a case where I didn't get points, but he had 22.8, which I'd be okay with if I had him in. Ginty was interesting. He ended up with 18.8 points, but Halani, who's essentially just he would have been in the top 16 in the new top 16, but he just doesn't qualify since he was injured early in the season. Ended up with like 31 points, so that was a tough decision for the guys that had them on their teams this week. Is it should you play Gene T because he may or he was supposed to play, but how much is he going to play? Uh, we ended up helping a guy out and kind of last minute said make the switch to Halani because Ginty might play, but it's probably going to be more limited. So good decision if you guys put Halani in over Ginty. But with that, let's take a look at the new top 16, and you'll notice we do have three guys out. Brooks, I guess since we know that he's out for the season, is no longer on the list. The guys at the very bottom were Judkins and Estime. What's interesting is even though they had decent games, uh, they still didn't manage enough points to stay in because you had some other guys that have been having bigger games, which are Penny Boone. 5 of his last 6, he's had 20 plus. Henderson bounced back. We thought maybe his best games were behind him, but he did manage to you know get another 30-point game. Had 31.2 against Minnesota, and then Devin Neal has been pretty consistent here in the second half of the season with 5 of his last 6 at 20 plus points. So and that's 8 out of his 11 on the season. He's had 20 plus. So even though Devin Neal hasn't had those high 30 and 40-point games, been very consistent. Getting in the 20s at least, and now he's worked his way into the top 16. But uh, with that, let's jump right into who we think we would sit out of this group because it's a pretty solid group. But if you've just got a couple, you can name those, and then I'll jump in. Or if you've got all 4 of them, Willie, it's up to you.
Hmm. Um, yeah, it's just an interesting new group that we're seeing. So you got to kind of digest it. I I don't want to just say I'm trying. I don't want to just pick on them all, but uh, I'm gonna do that warning on
Mm-hmm.
Henderson. Um, that's one that stands out.
So you're saying no Henderson against Michigan. You're
Mhm.
benching all guys playing
Yeah.
Michigan.
Well, and if Estime was sitting there at 16, obviously he's out. I would say the same thing about Estime. I mean, Ohio State's defense is pretty on par as well. So, it would be just be twofold on that. If I had to say that. So, not just picking on all the Ohio State players.
I agree with you on the Henderson, by the way. That'll be one of my sits from the group of 16 here. I just think they also, spread it around a few too many backs still.
hmm let's see. Oh boy. Yeah, I there's n- man, it's going to be a little tough.
I'll throw uh,
Um,
I'll throw Ott in
old,
there.
old,
Ott
this
against
old.
UCLA, I think, was as tough as they've been against running backs as far as fantasy production. I'm going to throw Ott in there just because of that UCLA number 4 ranking. Because again, we're comparing him just to the guys here. Um, and then,
hmm
I don't know that we've seen the consistency from Ramon Davis, and Hampton's a guy that I've gone back and forth all year long with. So because we've got to get to our number, I'm going to go Henderson, Jaden Ott, Amarian Hampton, and Ramon Davis as the 4 that I would bench.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. And
Ginty,
then,
what do you think about Ginty? Is you want to swap Ginty for one of the 4 I mentioned on your list?
yeah, I would only because it's Air Force. Air Force, they give up 88 yards on the ground. So I mean, I can definitely see them or him having a tough go, especially if he's
Right. So
splitting with
you're going to
Kalani.
keep Henderson on the bench, Ott on the bench, Ginty on the bench, and who's your 4th? Davis or Hampton?
I was, I'm gonna. I can't do either one of those only because they've proved us wrong too many times. Every time we choose them, something like that happens. They both go off. So I would say another guy down further on the list, and I would probably, if it's just me personally, which it is. Um, man, having to choose between those
Mm-hmm.
two. Mm, yeah, I know we're running low on time. Give me.
No,
Go
Davis, you're
ahead.
not so worried about Louisville. defense because what you think he's more. They're just it's SEC versus Louisville, and they've just got that in there.
Yeah, he's just proven that he can get it done. So yeah, I'm just not going to go there. So yeah, just give me another guy on the list. We'll say I'll say Irving
So
again.
you're keeping Hampton and
Just
Davis in and going against
not
Irving. Okay,
yeah yeah, not my worst for the week, but
okay. Well, I'm glad you had some guys that were different there. So with that, let's see who we like the best. I mean, we got Ollie Gordon going against the 104th ranked BYU against fantasy running backs. Kyrie Robinson, I'm scared of now because even though UNLV is 133rd, he's splitting carries also. Uh, Harvey's looking good against Houston. I think I think I got to put my money on Gordon to have another big one. Finish strong. He won't, Jinky's got too much of a lead. He can't become RB1, but I think he brings the average up even more with another, close to 30-point game or more.
Yeah. All right. So my best for the week, I'm going to go with Mr. Blake Watson. They get Temple, who's given up almost 200 yards on the ground. They've given up 23 rushing touchdowns. He might have three. At the very least, he better have two, and he'll probably have another one
Yeah.
through the
Now,
air. So we'll go Mr. Blake Watson. My worst, I'm still going to go Travion Henderson if I have to choose. We'll go there. It is our last week, so yeah, thank you guys for watching and listening. And I we hope to be back. At least I do. At some point in time, we're going to be back in late January, if not February. So again, thank you guys for watching and listening.